And that works. Excellent. Yes, thanks for the introduction. Yes, it's a large team that I'm representing today. It was an EPSRC funded research project led by Wendy Moncur at Strathclyde University. We brought together computer scientists, HCI experts, and design experts, and lawyers. The nice thing is that in a way it fits into the remit that Guido gave us for this conference to think about impact on the environment and the interaction between the digital and the environmental of our discipline. So the title is Toxic in Small Doses, Narrative and Cumulative Data Disclosure. So the basic idea really is that as we disclose information about ourselves online, we are very often asked to make a risk assessment. We get information. Ideally, that should help us to make an informed risk assessment. And the problem is we all know this doesn't happen, that we are really, really bad at making this type of assessment. And the specific problem that we wanted to look at was the problem of cumulative data disclosure. So it's one thing to decide, can I trust Facebook with my credit card? I know Facebook, I know my credit card, I know this is a big ticket item. I can make a reasonably informed decision about that sort of disclosure. Can I agree on being filmed for or photographed for this event and then tweet it? Well, probably yes. What could be the risk? What could be the risk for me? Well, it might display me with, yeah, again, my yellow shirt, and someone who looks at a Facebook update from yesterday sees me in a yellow shirt, and someone who then looks at a Twitter update that I made from Monday in a yellow shirt. And at some point, some of my students say, this Schafer is a real sloth, isn't he? I mean, he is wearing the same shirt for over a week. Bah, full. So lots and lots of in themselves utterly harmless, unproblematic decisions that we don't think about even a second can, through an cumulative effect, nonetheless create potentially quite significant risk. And we wanted to see how that features in both the regulatory and the computational ecosystem. So there are two different types of cumulative data leakage or disclosure. One is synchronic over time. Certain things that I disclose or are disclosed about me today can be totally harmless, but if we follow a certain trail over time, combine it with information that was disclosed years ago, that could be a problem. And asynchronic across various databases, various social media, again, in themselves harmless, but cumulatively potentially quite risky. And there's a legal principle behind it, an important legal principle that I think shows the difficulty for the law to get to grips with that type of risky behavior, as a principle de minimi non curat lex, which essentially says, well, the law doesn't concern itself with trifles. There are certain things that are so irrelevant that the majesty of the law shouldn't be evoked here. And one of the reasons that I like to talk about this principle is that it allows me to tell a dirty limerick, which is always great. There was once a law student called Rex, who had a diminutive sex. When charged with exposure, he replied with composure, de minime non curat lex. Amazing, isn't it? I just love it. I want to get that into a paper. I haven't quite succeeded yet, but at one day I will. And slightly more seriously, reflecting back the discussion that we had yesterday about harms. There was an emerging discussion amongst philosophers, especially with a background in phenomenology at around 2008, an influential paper by Bradley, who tried to bring to the point from an ontological perspective what is harm. And quite a number of these brought in a degree of significance in the very definition of harm. So it has to be something that concerns us. It has to be something that raises across a specific level of conscious awareness to count as a harm. So in the very definition of harm, potentially at least, there's also this threshold element already in place. This is a sound principle normally, but especially I would say in the internet age, that has become challenged. Because one of the things the internet allows us to do is to combine lots and lots of things, and sometimes do something really, really good, like Wikipedia. and every expert donating 5 minutes of their time, create something amazing. SETI at home, I think my computer still runs this, distributed processing of data from astronomical observatories. Everyone donates a little bit of time. Together we create something amazing. But then the negative side, the denial of service. Lots and lots of individually perfectly legitimate and harmless actions that only become a problem if they become coordinated and reach a certain level of scale. Each individual one is perfectly harmless. It is a cumulative effect. And that was one of the reasons why we needed specific legislation in the UK to capture what is going on here, because otherwise, try to, in a criminal proceeding, we heard about the backlog and the automated profiling, try to trial 10 million people simultaneously, each for sending one specific thing to a website. Obviously, that doesn't work. Yeah, so we needed a different approach for that. Twitter shitstorms, I think, are the same problem. We could easily say one of these abusive posts, who cares? But if you get 100 of them or 1,000 of them on a single day, all your mentions are blocked, that becomes then a problem. And I think we realize it also in different contexts. For instance, the idea of a hostile environment and microaggression. Again, the notion that lots and lots of things that in themselves are harmless. And I don't like the word microaggression, because quite often they aren't even aggressive. They are perfectly nice. They are meant nice. But you know, if you have to explain 5 times a day, as soon as you open your mouth that yes, you are from Germany, that can become tiresome. So this notion of cumulative harm, of individually unproblematic action, that I think is a regulatory problem. It's a difficulty simply for the reason of the way the law works. So we tried to explore how people experience that. And the idea really was originally, we interview lots and lots of people when they are not online about their data practices, make them reflect about it and see what they are doing, what their risk awareness is. We talk about their communication channels, their networks, and so on and so forth, to elicit the sort of subconscious risk assessment that we are carrying out. There was a small problem with that. Oops. Yeah, the problem obviously was suddenly there was COVID. And everyone went online, and everyone experienced working from home, and that blurring between the private and the professional lives. And that put all the privacy concerns more into the foreground, and we wanted them to be for the purpose of the interview. So we had a certain methodological problem here that it, when doing these interviews now through Zoom, we couldn't quite get them in this moment of vulnerability, so to speak, and they were not consciously thinking about blurring boundaries. So we got quite a number of interesting quotes here, how people shared memes and didn't think about it. And then over time, people were spotting there's something problematic with the mental health of that person happening. Each individual post would tell you absolutely nothing, but if you saw them over time, you suddenly realized maybe this person has problems, maybe they need help, which can be good, but also maybe we should look for a replacement in the job context as quickly as possible. Change in behavior that only becomes apparent if we look at them over time. Yes, that's when we move into lockdown. Suddenly, people have to do many more things online. And they realize some of the risks that they expose themselves to in lockdown, announcing that on Strava you are still doing exercise slightly maybe too far away from your house. Suddenly you get nervous that people might pick up on that. Using printers suddenly remotely, you are not any longer there when the paper is printed out, realizing that might disclose things about you. And then, of course, a family. Suddenly we were living much, much closer with our nearest and dearest. And they started to post events. And these are 2 of my favorite quotes. Young teenagers. And I said I wanted to join one of the intelligence agencies to my mom, and she found some blog online and posted, "My son wants to become a spy. How does he do it?" For being a spy, it's a bit counterproductive. Yes. And more problematically, when I was in the army, because of the unit that I was associated with at the training and I passed it, as I would away, I mentioned it to my mother, and she was so proud of it. And she posted that he's been in Wales with that unit doing the training, and that immediately got him into trouble with his superiors because it now became clear where that unit is stationed, when they doing exercise, lots of things that in grocery might find potentially quite interesting. So he realized he had to be much, much more careful what he was told to his mother, because she kept tweeting about the successes of her son. So these were some of these insights we got from the first round of things we did, and then we tried to do something with it to operationalize it. And what we did was to create fake invented profiles of some typical users, and gave our participants the role to find out as much about them as they could, assuming, for instance, the role of a future employer. We had, look, this guy has applied for a job with you. Try to find out if you want to hire him from an insurance company. These type of institutions that might do a adversarial media search on you. All of them vaguely based on real examples. I don't know if you recognize that one. It's particularly interesting, or the origins for that one. Story that I think broke pretty much at around the same time. We all used to travel a lot, obviously. Remember the times when we were still traveling, now started again. You put a lock on your luggage, don't you? And that's a problem because if the security services want to search through your luggage, the only thing they can do is to clip off the lock and or cut through your bag or do something like that. So the Americans came up with company came up with a brilliant idea. They are selling assured locks, which are reasonably safe, but there's a master key that can be used by airport security personnel to open the lock. It saves them a minute. I mean, you are not suddenly more exposed to interactions by them because they could simply use, you know, the bolt cutter and remove it, but they now have this sort of single key to cut off the thing. And the CEO of that company on his Facebook page or LinkedIn really proudly said, today we went into production and here are our keys that are going to make traveling so much more pleasant for everyone. I think within 2 hours, people had, from the photograph, made a copy of the key and printed in 3D printers. And they essentially had to throw them away and do it again. So these really, you know, don't think about all the things that can suddenly influence what people know about you. So here in this case, very proudly, he says, finally, we got our mortgage offer accepted. We are moving in, and you see enough of the keys. We checked this with a professional locksmith to make a copy, and you can see here about just about the number of the house, and because he is also, yes, an avid runner, you can also see where he starts his daily run and where he stops it. So with that information combined, it's relatively easy to know he just moved into that new house. These are the times that it is unoccupied. This is how you get access to it. So that's the sort of idea, alerting people to these dangers that they expose themselves to. That obviously is based on the other brilliant American story that from Fitbit data, it was possible to identify where army barracks were located because the soldiers were doing their running around it. And you got on these, the barrack sites were blanked out in Google, but you could very easily identify them on the shared Fitbit data because people were always running around the same installation. So they were all sort of picking up some real examples. So we asked people to play detective, so to speak, with us, trying to make these connections using mirror boards. That's how we did it then online as well. And then reflect about what they learned. And some of, again, of the feedback we got was quite encouraging because they suddenly said, oh, we never thought about this. And I will change my own behavior now. I suddenly realized how much of this is leaking. There was a similar thing, just to pick this up quickly, for a report for the Scottish government on online courts and Zoom procedures. One of the things that struck me is how much of the context you might disclose to the judge simply from the background of your house. So you are in a custody case, and the judge sees, it never introduces evidence because it isn't evidence, but he sees that your sink is dirty, or that there is mold on the wall. There's a low-level physical aggression case, and you try to present yourself as a good citizen, but there are the posters on the wall that indicate that you might have extremist political leaning, something like that. So lots of information leaks out, but you are never fully aware. And I think this was an interesting learning experience for them. And that is essentially the idea. We want to try to develop now tools that can be used for onboarding of people who are working in security sensitive environments to get a better notion of the type of cumulative risk, because we are rather bad at assessing them. And that brings me to the next slide, which is sort of highly appropriate given the title of this panel. Oh, with some power, the gift to be us to see ourselves as others see us, and translated into English. Oh, with some power, the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us, see how we are perceived by others. So the idea is essentially to allow people to combine their own data, and only they have access to it because only they have the login passwords and all that, to give a sort of graphical representation of their overall digital footprint and their risk assessment, how all these things can create risk for them through a combination. And we've sort of intentionally chosen a sort of environmental imagery here. Luciano Floridi, for instance, talks about the ecosphere, and we can think of these data leakages as the equivalent of oil leakages. You spoke earlier on about data as oil, as a new oil. Oh yes, because it is highly pollutant. It makes us dependent on dictatorial regimes somewhere else. It leads to massive corruption through multinational companies. So I think this analogy is perfectly apt. It just says exactly the opposite of what the people who are normally using it want to say with it. So the question is, how can we keep our ecosphere clean? And that's why I think we need to make the sort of risk assessment more intuitive. We need a different type of language, a different type of metaphors to help people to do this. And we started in a way with this one, sort of the breach of the dike. You're doing these walls surrounding you, your firewalls, your protective settings. And then there is this very, very small gap that you create, something that you never thought about that could be harmful. But if you leave it unattended, that's how it ends. It sort of can extend that breach and become a problem. We also were thinking of another highly appropriate topical metaphor, of course, of the virus. That one piece of information, which again in itself is relatively unproblematic, spreads to other pieces of information and contaminates them and makes them ill, and then spreads to even other pieces of information about you. So this one piece that de-anonymizes you, for instance, infects all the anonymous data about you and turns it from healthy to unhealthy. And I think the best one, and that's really what I want to explore much more, and this too isn't yet a paper, I never saw the point of having papers before I talk, is from environmental science and this notion of pollution and how it accumulates over time. And in environmental regulation, we had all these problems for a very long time, where companies were pleading, okay, what we did in itself just didn't cause any harm. But because every company that did the same pollution was pleading the same argument, prosecution became really complicated. We have this problem of harms only coming up in the long run. So we know that people are made risk assessments about long-term consequences for them. So we think that the type of vocabulary that we already have from environmental pollution also works for data pollution and might enable us to equip people not just with the technology, that is one of the aims, but also with the vocabulary to make better informed harm decisions. And that is actually the end of my talk.